Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Please join me in a pledge to the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, Thank you. First order of business is the approval of the order of the agenda. It has been distributed. Thank you, Commissioner Simmons. It's been moved. Is there a second, please? Second by Commissioner Olson. Been moved and seconded to approve the order of the agenda. Is there any further discussion? Hearing or seeing none, we'll move forward with voting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next order of business is the approval of the minutes that were distributed for December 17th. Pages 2 through 4, they have been distributed.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Jurdevig. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner Olson, thank you. Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of December 17th, 2018. Is there any further discussion? Hearing or seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of approval of the minutes of December 17th, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next order of business is building permits. Building permits have been distributed to the commissioners. Are there any questions? Comments? What is your pleasure? Thank you, Commissioner Simmons. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Jurdevig. Moved and seconded to approve the building permit report as presented. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Next order of business is the consent agenda. There's 2 items on the consent agenda. The bills, which is pages 5 through 110, and the pledging of assets, and all the information has been distributed. My apologies. The agenda has been modified, so the only thing on the consent agenda for this evening is the bills. The pledgings of assets will take place at a future meeting. That's a change that took place since Thursday.
I move we approve the consent agenda.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Simmons. Then moved and seconded to approve the bills as presented, pages 5 through 110. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of accepting the bills as presented, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next order of business is our regular agenda. The first item on the agenda is to review the engineer's report and developer request for sewer, water, storm, and street improvement district on number 1321. Mr. Scott.
Yes, thank you, Commission President Dardis and members of the Commission. Before you have an agenda item regarding the engineer's report for the improvements located at the Wilds 11th edition. In the past, this particular agenda, which is again approving an engineer's report and going through the authorization to start plans and specs, in the past that's been on the consent agenda, so we're going to try something new moving forward. Place these on the regular agenda so we have a little more in-depth discussion and education with staff and the Commission in general before getting too far along. So with that, I'm going to start with just a little background. The Wilds 11th edition is a continuation of the development that is south of 52nd Avenue, and it is adjacent to the city of Horace, both on the east side and to the south. The preliminary plat was submitted and reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission at their meeting on July 10th, 2018. It's difficult to see on the screen here, but It includes a large number of residential lots. With that, there's, in the middle of the plat, which you can see there's 2 large lots here that are designated for city retention, and another large parcel here, I believe, designated for a multifamily development. Then moving forward, on September 13th, 2018, at the regular City Commission meeting, the petition for improvements, which is a petition filed by a developer, was reviewed and approved by the City Commission, in which case we approved the creation of a special assessment district to both finance and construct the improvements. That district was titled 1321. You can see here the boundary is including the entire development south of 52nd, so it's not just a boundary encompassing the Wilds 11th Edition platted area. It also includes the other phases. There's the Wilds 7th Edition, which is in this particular corner, the Wilds 8th Edition, which extends both on the west and east side of 9th Street West, along with the future phases of the Wilds. And the reasoning for that extended boundary is that there's a nature of the improvements that will benefit a larger area than that plat of Wilds 11. So items like stormwater, the retention, whether or not there's a collector road, again, improvements that will not be just specific to the Wilds 11 plat. So we included all of those other phases of the Wilds. So from the time that the assessment district was approved, over the past 2-3 months, we've been working with the developer, the project engineer, on coordinating what the proposed improvements will be. And at this time, Moore Engineering has prepared an engineer's report, which is in your packet for review and consideration. And I'm going to go through, I'm going to pull up that engineer's report and give a brief overview. So they start out again with a project summary, which basically identifies what the intent of this improvement district is going to be for, which again is particularly to service the Wilds 11th Edition, the sewer, the water services, along with storm lines and roadway network. And along with those local improvements will come some regional improvements, such as the retention ponds. And I'm not going to get into each category in detail unless, of course, you have a specific question. But for the respect of the time of the meeting tonight, I'm just going to try to go through this briefly. They then moved on to an economic evaluation, which took a look at what will the assessments be after the improvement district is finished. So as we get into future pages here, you'll see that, well, specifically, they start out with the existing special assessments, which include things like the previous editions of the Wilds, along with some of the regional improvements that have been done, such as 32nd Avenue, 40th Avenue West. They touched on what are the pending specials, and then, of course, move into what will the assessments be specifically for the Wilds 11th Edition. I'm going to get to that.
Justin, can you back up just a bit, those
Yep.
maps? In the 7th and 8th edition, are there already existing homes there? Or are they just plotted out at this point?
Yes, the 7th and 8th edition, they have started building homes. I believe the 7th edition's for the most part filled out pretty substantially. 8th edition, I don't know if it's a 50-50 or not, but yes, they have, they're well underway in building those houses out. So for the special assessment analysis, again, this is in your packets, but just to touch on it, these smaller figures, roughly $1,000, give or take, those are the projected regional costs that will be assessed to the properties that are outside of the 11th edition platted area. As I scroll down, we get to the localized costs, which are anywhere from $25,000 to $35,000. And again, that will be for the local improvements specifically for the Wilds 11th edition. I'm going to bounce back up. Okay, so what you can see here is a layout of the master plan utilities, if you will. So identifying where the estimated sewer, water, storm locations will be and how it will service this entire subdivision, along with, you can see in here that there's the regional retention ponds that serve all of the Wilds neighborhoods south of 52nd. You can see there's some pedestrian facilities included, so on and so forth. I also want to point out that there is an existing homestead on the very west edge of the development. They've been there for quite some time. We are coordinating certain features of this project, such as access, and again, this is being coordinated through not only the plat phase, but as we plan for these improvements. So the plat, for example, has designated an access lot off of to the east side. So in the future, or currently, their access comes along the diversion. So as you can follow the mouse there, that is identifying where their current driveway is. That is not intended to be there long term. There have been, the developer has met with that particular property owner and discussed items like access in the future. So that residence is aware that long term the driveway going up to 52nd Avenue along the diversion will go away, and in the future they will access through the Wilds neighborhood. And again, it's kind of hard to see, but the driveway will be reconfigured to go out the east. And again, the plat here has reserved about a 40-foot easement to do so. This particular map here is just identifying some of the grading and drainage components that we are coordinating. With the lots that'll abut the diversion property and or 52nd Avenue today, there is an existing ditch system out there that will eventually need to be replaced or modified, and the drainage be internalized into that development. That is something that we plan to coordinate with Southeast Cass Water Resource District. Of course, they are in control of the diversion right away, which is also on the north side here, extends all the way over to 11th Street. So, and as you can see on these particular pages here is where they've estimated the cost for these improvements. One additional item that has been added, which is not typical of city installations on these districts, the developer is requesting, and which you can see here, I've zoomed in, a few items be added to this district, which will be constructed and financed within the special assessment, but included with the city's project, so that there's cost efficiencies there. But getting to these, one of them is a decorative fence a fence has already been included with the 7th and 8th editions, but as we've developed some different process or protocol, we want to identify these non-standard items that are installed with city improvement districts. So one of those being a fence, which they've estimated at $120,000. The next one is some additional grading, dirt work that will benefit the lots, make them available to install bi-level homes, for example. So they want to raise the lots up, engineer the dirt there so that they're ready and prepared for that type of a construction of a home. So a bi-level typically doesn't have as deep as a foundation as a traditional home. So we need to engineer the fill, and to do that with this project comes with efficiencies, economies of scale, but again is not traditionally put in or a standard item with a city improvement project. And they're estimating about $160,000 for that. And the third item here are some improvements on the HOA lots. Again, more grading, but specifically these will be on HOA lots that are being maintained by the developer through, or at least if he sets up an HOA association, those lots will be maintained in the future by that association, not for any particular resident. And the cost of those improvements are $14,500. So the total of all the developer requested items is roughly $294,000. I am comfortable moving forward, including these in the district, but again, wanted that transparency and that decision ultimately to come from the commission body.
Can you give me an example of what the improvements would be on the HOA lots, or potentially what the developer would do?
They're going to do some grading in there, so to make them a little more of a finished product. So when a traditional lot is built on, a homeowner comes in there, builds their house, and then levels off their yard, plants the grass, so on and so forth. With these HOA lots, instead of relying upon that to be done in the future by the developer or an HOA association, the intent is to now go establish a final grade and seed them so that they're growing vegetation. I don't know the extent of the vegetation if they plan on doing any unique landscaping, but the intent is to put a final grade on them, landscaping, if you will, or establish turf, so that they're already functional when the development is done.
And probably graded to the degree that we need them, so they'll work with the runoff and things like that, rather than
Correct.
Some people having too much or too little of a grade, so it's all uniform.
Right. Yep. And this. Yep. So again, and this will establish drainage, proper drainage, and be functional.
Commissioner Simmons.
Thank you. Dustin, I think you told me now there's already homes out here that's going to be in this assessment district that are already built and probably sold?
Yes.
So I guess explain to me how, with the $160,000 for the dirt, especially that part that's not normal, how's that fair to the people that already have their home and already paid for it? Why should they have to pay for somebody else's?
Good question, Commissioner Simmons. So I'm going to go back to the assessment district map. So the nature of those improvements related to the additional grading on this particular, in the Wilds 11th plat, that assessment will be localized to just the lots that are benefiting from that dirt work. So for example, if all of that work is for this particular block and for this particular block, that assessment will stay, call it a front foot, it won't be a front foot, but it'll be localized to those lots that have specifically dirt work done.
So those people won't be paid for then? That's the bottom line,
so the
right?
people in the non-shaded areas, the 7th and 8th editions, will not be charged for the engineered fill that is done specifically for lots within the Wilds 11th edition.
Same thing with the decorative fence?
The decorative fence, I'm not 100% sure on that answer. If I recall, that fence is going along 52nd Avenue and extending also along 9th as it has to the north. I anticipate that would be 100% the Wilds 11th, but for example, if there is a portion of that fence that is more benefiting the entire region, then there is a portion of that fence that would be assessed to the region. The improvements that I do know that are going to get assessed out regionally, if you will, to the non-shaded areas are specifically the retention ponds. I know that work is intended to be assessed throughout that region.
Because some of those places already have fencing, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so they would have already paid for their fencing, I'm assuming.
Yes.
So they shouldn't have to pay again.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's where we would certainly give that scrutiny, if you will, when we get to the allocating of the assessments. That will be tracked, and that assessment will go on to the properties that benefit. I'm anticipating that that's all the Wilds 11, but I can't say with any certainty at this time. Something I can verify though and get back.
Like that one page that you had where it showed the 14.5 for the HOA and the elevator roadway of 160,000. The decorative fence is the first one on there, so I would assume that's a localized assessment.
Yes, yeah, and I believe that's, if I were to go back to these assessment spreadsheets, it's not broken down in here that I see, but again, it's something that is probably easily answered by the project engineer that understands that detail. They're anticipating about 1,300 feet, which I think is entirely for the area along 52nd Avenue, that separation from the development from 52nd Avenue. And if that is the case, if that is the entire limits, meaning there's no fence planned for 9th, then I anticipate that would be 100% assessed within the 11th edition. I don't know if Mr. Dumas, the developer, is not here, so, but yeah, we will certainly coordinate that, and any item that is directly benefiting will be stayed as or assessed locally.
Just for my own knowledge, we're at the very, very, very beginning of this process, right? This is the...
Step one is to review the petition to create the district, in which we did in September. And yes, so now, technically at this point, the plans and specifications have not been authorized yet. So we haven't quite got to the detailed plans, which things change when you get to that level, you know, and that's where what we do, as delineated in the Century Code, the process is to start by reviewing an assessment district, establishing that boundary. Again, that was done in September. The next step is to estimate the nature of the work in the form of a cost estimate, which is included in this particular engineer's report. So at this point, we're saying, yes, the cost makes sense. The items being proposed within the improvements make sense. We're approving that. This also establishes a baseline now of comparing when we receive bids, to go back and compare that to the engineer's report or the cost estimate. And if, for example, the bids come in higher than 40% of what was estimated, we will not proceed with construction. Or there is a process to that. You cannot assess more than 40% of what is estimated. So again, yeah, we're early in the stages here. And I just wanted to point out that we are following that process that's in the Century Code.
Mr. Scott, so in your experience in working with the city of West Fargo, how unusual is it that this developer has come in now and requested to add these three items after the fact?
It's certainly not unusual, but it's what we would say it's not typical of what would be standard city infrastructure.
To be placed on special assessments.
Correct. So these items have been included in assessment districts in the past with the city improvements, but again, for full disclosure and discussion and direct approval from the commission, we wanted to separate these items out, present them, and if the decision is not to include these into an improvement district, so be that, and then the developer can go back and think about privately financing them. There have been neighborhoods that have developers privately finance items like this. For example, the Rivers Bend development, that particular developer did install quite a bit of fencing, HOA amenities, and did a lot of dirt work at their own dime. In doing so, they kind of control the contracting with whoever's doing that installation, and in this case, the contracting will be controlled by the city, but of course, the developer has the benefit of taking advantage. The financing is through the special assessment district. So I think in either case, you know, in the case of Rivers Bend, those costs were probably reflected back into the prices of the lots, whereas in this case, the costs will be reflected back into the special assessments. So some of the discussion we've had internally as staff is identifying what are standard items to service a development from the city's aspect. So items like water, sewer, storm drains, streets. Those are the essential items to service a neighborhood. Items like fences, additional dirt work, they're needed, but they're not necessarily the standard or essential items to provide service to this neighborhood. So that's where we've decided moving forward, we want to bring any of these non-standard items to the commission for approval.
And we thank you for that. I think that's a good public policy to do.
Just one more question for Dustin. In those areas that are already being sold and built on, have they been informed, or when will we inform them that they've got this regional cost now?
So, good question. There hasn't been a direct information or correspondence with that development. At this point, the city's policy has been to, once we get to a point where we have approved plans and specs and bid out a project, any pending specials are then determined and posted onto the website. But in the case of, especially with improvements that are being requested by a developer, there hasn't been a protocol to go out and notify adjacent properties, especially for items that are non-protestable, which the majority of these are. Stormwater improvements are non-protestable, but that's not to say that we can't do that. I'm just saying that at this point we have not done so.
Has staff ever considered that for transparency purposes, that has to be a part of the developer's obligation to reach out to those people when things like this, non-traditional things, or excuse the term if that's not the appropriate one, of non-traditional terms, items that are going to be added to special assessments through the city? Has that ever been a consideration by staff to make the developer responsible for that communication over and above pending special assessments listed on the website?
Certainly is a discussion point as of late, I can tell you that. The additional or non-standard improvements at this point, I believe, are all going to be assessed within the Wild's 11th edition itself, which is at this
unbuilt
point...
Unbuilt on lots.
Right.
The lots that are unbuilt on.
Right. So, with the exception of, I'm not 100% sure on the fence. But to your point of, there's a regional component with this improvement district, i.e. the retention ponds. Again, no, we have not communicated that to the remaining properties or the additional properties in this district. And that is something that we can certainly take into advisement. And again, I think the questions would reciprocate back to, is that the developer's responsibility, the city's responsibility? Is that a requirement when we're going through the plat process, prior to final approval of a plat, so on and so forth? We don't have that necessarily in place today. But again, we're actively working on communication in general as it relates to special assessments.
Excuse me, Mr. Scott. Mr. Shockley, would that be within the authority of the community to make that demand, even if the city, because of addresses and the like, that the city do it and charge a fee back to the developer for doing that? type of thing?
You certainly can as part of your approval process, and I was sort of thinking through that precise issue given our recent information we received from our special assessment form. I have tried with other communities in recording the developer's agreement to give notice to subsequent property owners. So I think there's two issues. So there's the property owners that are existing out there that they're going to get this regional assessment, and then you have the property owners that are going to buy the lots that have all these assessments on. And so I'll take the second category first. I've tried everything from recording the agreement, hoping that a real estate attorney will pull it up and say there's potential special assessments against your property. That hasn't really worked all that well. We've tried situations in which we put the obligation on the developer to notify. That has some potential, we've seen some success, but there's also been times in which they haven't told the subsequent property owners, and then the city will say, well, your developer should have told you, and they said, well, our developer never told us. And so you could certainly charge an additional fee that you would send a second round of letters once people have moved out into the Wilds 11th. For the property owners coming, or that are out there and existing, the first component for the regional assessment, given where we're at, you probably want to send them letters just notifying them of this assessment. You could include, as part of the fee for the development, the cost associated with that, sending that letter. And I would say that the city should send out the letters but require the developer to be present at those meetings. My feeling is this increasingly the city gets, for lack of a better term, blamed for the assessments when a lot of them are coming out of the development. It seems like they're being generated by the development. We should have the person that's requesting them present to answer questions for the new development also. Just kind of some thoughts, and I don't have a great answer, but just some of my initial thoughts on how to handle it.
But it is within the community's authority that we could do that.
Yes, you could make it a condition of the...
I would highly encourage staff to consider that.
Absolutely. Any other questions before I move forward?
One additional question. We've talked about this in the past as that area is developed down there. Have you entered into a binding or an agreement with the city of Horace as far as the connections? It still shows connections on the preliminary plats and stuff like that, but I know there was a discussion with Horace on that, and I don't know if we ever crossed the finish line on that or not with them.
Right. We have had recent meetings, specifically with the Wilds 11th edition. I believe Tim is working on the developer's agreement. The conversation has come back up. We've had a couple meetings now with Horace's representatives. And I think the intent with the Wilds 11th edition subdivision agreement is a finalization on what is going to be required, specifically the type of road that will connect down to, say, 64th, how it will be financed, so on and so forth. Tim, if you want to speak to that.
Quick question, Mr. Scott. When you refer to 64th, the north side of 64th is West Fargo, the south side is Horace?
Actually, the boundary of West Fargo, if you can see here, stops about a quarter mile north of 64th. So the challenge gets to be is there's 3 large parcels that are adjacent or along the north side of 64th that are in the Horace city limits. So that's where it's been a coordination challenge and something that we've got to confirm on installing that improvement. Obviously, the city of West Fargo can't force in an improvement in another city's jurisdiction, so what we're doing is putting this back onto the developer as a condition of approving their plat. This needs to be resolved, and I think that's where it's been touched on with previous plats, but I think now with the Wilds 11th edition, the intent is before approving that final plat and moving forward, this will be solidified. But I'd like Tim to confirm.
Just touch you.
final plat yet. So this is unorthodox that you're seeing the improvement district before the plat. The problem is that we approved their change order to the Wilds 9th edition to add this on. That's why Dustin's at this point where he's got to bring it before you. So at the Wilds 11th edition, second reading and final plat approval, we intended to bring before you the fact that this piece is not done. Our agreement simply states that they need to coordinate. What we asked Horace to do, because we can't build a road in their city limits, Dustin can't sign off on that in the city limits. They've put together some cost estimates for that road, and we're going to bring those before you at that time, and then hopefully at the Wilds 12th edition, tie them directly to that, because this area here at the end of Wilds 8th, down to Horace city limits, West Fargo city limits, is not constructed yet. So not only do they need to make that connection from our city limits to Horace and 64th for that secondary connection down to the new high school, they still need to build a pretty substantial roadway, which is going to cost quite a bit of money. So they need more lots in there.
Mr. Solberg, this is going to be a difficult question for you. So we have this information before us this evening on 1321 to review the engineer's report, and you don't have the final plot, which is unusual for the city of West Fargo to be making, for this commission to be making a decision on that. Why don't you share a little bit with, why is the process not reaching a full circle? You know what I'm saying? It's a bit of a chicken. We're ahead of, the cart's ahead of the horse.
Yeah, well, so it's important for this, and this is not typical, because typically they wouldn't have, when the developer came before you to ask for the change, or we all kind of shrugged and a little cranky about it, but it didn't stand up and
the economics of it swayed us.
Yeah, exactly. It made sense for them to save some money there, and so that's kind of why at that discussion we were like, well, we can't say that we should spend $1 million more just to go through our process.
Just to confirm, that change order was a change order onto an existing improvement district, and that change order was for the first block and a half, if you will, of the Wilds.
Because the contractor would give us the same unit pricing, and thus it was a savings.
And so now Dustin's trying to piece together where easements go, where retention is, and that's hinging on the final plat. So the final plat is kind of waiting on this, and once this gets accepted, they'll finish up the plat. I'll probably be here before you with the plat in the next meeting, or if not, the meeting after. So that's where we're a little bit more comfortable with this than we typically would be. And you're not seeing me standing up here saying.
So the critical term for me, you are comfortable with the process as it's moving forward.
Yeah, we have just a few minor edits that I think we need to work through with the developer.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, the sensitivity with getting to this process now is the timing of opening bids, getting the most competitive prices that we can get. I think as staff we're sensitive to, efficiencies and economies of scale, but at the same time, yes, without compromising the integrity of our process and our system. So I was going to just conclude that engineer's report. The final pages are specifically related to the stormwater report that was conducted that identifies the overall retention system needs, the conveyance, the pumping station, so on and so forth. So that is quite a bit of detail, but again, it helps us feel comfortable that what is being evaluated today within this engineer's report and estimated for cost is going to be ultimately what is designed and constructed. So, I guess with that, I would move this forward, and as the agenda signifies, I would request that the engineer's report be approved, and that we also approve the developer's request to include these non-standard items, and then authorize the engineer to proceed with preparing the final plans and specifications.
I'm not sure if I want to actually include those additional things as part of the special assessment, the fence and the extra grading and all that to be part of a special assessment. I don't know if it's,
Mayor, just for, I guess, historical purposes, in the past, we have done that for some of them. And the reason being is because there's nobody in those homes right now. So, truth be told, quality of life is going to be better for those individuals that move in. They will know that they have to pay for it,
sure,
those products. So rather than wait or have the developer do it, which, again, whether they have money or not is our probably concern. My concern is the quality of life and if we can make it better for them. And either way, the homeowner is going to pay the bill at the end of the day.
mm-hmm.
As long as they know what's coming, you know, that developer is going to have to price that home at that particular price. So, again, in the past, not saying this is okay, but in the past, we have done this before.
Well, the content of whatever motion one of you would put forward would spell that out one way or the other, obviously. What's the pleasure of the commission?
I would make a motion that we approve what Dustin is asking for, and I guess that we, I don't know, Mayor, you brought this up earlier. Is there a way we can specifically make sure that the developer lets the new people know? Is that what we were going to do? Correct? Let them know that these are coming, because these are going to be local, definitely. They need to be local, so you know that. And then let them, John, let some type of a letter like we did with the last issue to make sure that they let these homeowners know. Again, either way, they're going to pay for it, so I don't know that it's a big, you know, that way, but it shows that we care and that we're concerned, in my opinion. So that would be my motion. You get that?
Yep.
Is there a second? Commissioner Olson?
How about to include the regional assessment that might be?
If
The developer's request?
that we let them
Notification
Yep,
to
no, absolutely.
existing residents out to the other
put that in there.
subdivisions.
I'll second that motion.
And moved and seconded to accept the engineer's report and developer request for sewer, water, storm, and street improvement in District 1321. Is there any further discussion? Hearing or seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Scott. Thank you, Mr. Sobert. The next order of business is item number 2 on the regular agenda. It's the sanitary rate change concerns. Mr. Steve Marquardt, who is in the audience. Steve, if you please step to the podium and cite your address for the secretary, please.
725 15th Avenue East.
The order of business is to, Mr. Marquardt, is to address the commission with regard to sanitation rate changes that have taken place. So, Mr. Marquardt, please.
Gentlemen, I'm here for the simple fact I'm a little, concerned about the lack of transparency of the increase in the sanitation rates. My understanding is that this was voted on back in September, and of course it didn't hit the paper. In fact, I have the paper right here until the 19th of December, and at that time basically saying $13 a month gone to $17.50. It'll take place January 1st. There was no time. I mean, I think in a situation like that, that's a 35% increase, 34.7 to be exact. But a 35% increase, 34.7, whichever you'd like to look at, I think it's something that drastic of an increase should have probably had a public hearing, or been announced back in September or October, whenever, if it happened in September. I know the dates exactly it took place, but let the people know so somebody could have questioned it before December 19th, and then, of course, there's no commission meeting or anything until it's going to go into effect anyway. It's almost like it's jamming it down the people's throat. This is what you're going to get. And
excuse me, Mr. Marquardt. Ada?
I just wanted to give you a historic account of our sanitation rates. And Chris can correct me, because what year was it we started recycling? 2014? Okay. All right. So in August of 2004, our rate for sanitation was $8.60. In 2007, it was $10. In 2011, it was $11. In 2012, the end of the year for 13, it went up to $13. And now in 2019, it will go up to $17.50. So basically, that says that in 15 years, the cost of providing sanitation service to the community, along with the addition of recycling, which is a significant cost to the city as we have to pay in extra every month, has only increased $8.90. If you put it in percentages, it sounds way worse. Our increase is $4.50 per residence, and people can set out as much garbage or as little as they want. They can set out all kinds of things out on the curb. This same service would cost you a lot more money in just about any other place. So I think Chris did a really good job breaking down our costs and making it very clear and effective, and that I just wanted to provide you with that information so you're aware of what the changes are that have happened.
Right. Thank you. Question, Melissa? Is Mr. Marquardt correct in the amount of times that it appeared within the West Fargo Pioneer or in any type of publications or on our website with regard to the dates as he's outlined them? I recall the story being in the... Very good. Mr. Thorsted has a comment.
Well, I also want to add to this, when we added recycling back in 2014, the commission's decision at that time, it cost, I believe it was $5.25, was it not, or right about there, the cost? Initial cost, and then there's an inflation clause within that contract. But the commission decided at that time, the first year, to use some reserve funds and pay for it so that we could transition the city into the program. After that, we had decided that we would start charging for that. We have never added anything extra for our sanitation bill to cover recycling. And our cost now, and maybe you can tell me what that is, Chris, is it $5.50, $5.60?
Roughly about five, a little over $5.50 per household. And then the recycling material offset was originally a program put in place for us to recover some costs from the amount of recycling as it's being sold to the foreign markets. But since that time, the recycling market has really taken a dive, and we're actually paying additional monies to the recycler now for that also, which is about $7,000 a month.
Do you recall off the top of your head, Chris, the investment of the recycling bins when they were placed at the household?
Well, the waste management is actually, they upfronted the cost of all the bins. But I can tell you, when we did start our bin program, it was about $500,000 for us to buy the bins ourselves.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Marquardt. We're trying to get a little historical here and make sure that we're accurate because I agree with you. If we didn't have any other articles in the paper or notifications or on the website, that does not speak well to transparency. So please continue.
Okay, and just back to even what Tina said and things like that. If we're going back to 2014, and there hasn't ever been the increase there, that would have been something maybe and I don't see that in this article, maybe I missed it, something there that says, there hasn't been an increase. But the other part about that, going back, and I know this for a fact, and you're going to pick up more pick up anything people throw out there, okay? Is that something that should go to a volume based? Because if I use more water, I pay more money. Okay? If I drive more, I pay more gas, so on and so forth. Even to the city, if I use more water. And I think the water is set at 3,000 gallons. You could use 2,000 gallons and still get charged for 3,000. But is it minimum of 3,000? Okay, well, about 3 months ago, my wife was in the hospital. We were home 5 days in that month because she was in Rochester. And we had 3,000 gallons of usage. And I guarantee we didn't use 3,000 gallons of water.
The reading each month depends on when we read it. So let's look at 1,900 gallons, and we come and read, we'll read 1,000. So then the next month, all of a sudden you have 3,000, we come and read, and now you're at 3,100. So it works its way out, but we only round figures 1,000 when we read. So.
And there's no way for a homeowner to know that, though, underwater.
Not unless they call an
okay.
With all due respect, can we stay on
Right, I'm just saying the things,
and
I'm sorry.
As a reference, that what Wendy said about the article was October 3rd in the Pioneer.
Okay, and I guess I probably missed that. I'm going back to, is it something that, when we got this new garbage collection system, they got rid of the 2 garbage men on a truck. Hey, we're gonna have this new truck, these new garbage cans, we're gonna save money, we don't need the people that are there. The problem is we're still sending out an extra truck every day. And I can tell you that from my own neighborhood, I see the things, I mean, my neighbors during the summer throw their grass clippings into the garbage can, they pick those up. It's in the garbage can, so I guess it is what it is. And so, you know, no one's going out the garbage guy and checking those out, he picks up the bucket, drops it in.
We'd like the address of that neighbor that's doing the grass clippings,
Well,
because that's an absolute no-no.
You know, I mean, we're putting right in my street, there's mattresses out there, there's different things all the time. Is that something people could haul by themselves, rather than getting a charge for everyone?
Mr. Simmons has a question for you.
Thank you. Actually, I don't want to have it for them, but it pertains to this, if that's okay. It's in reference to the same thing. Because I think all of us, especially me and Mike, who've been here a long time, have been very astute to our citizens and in reference to what they want from sanitation and what we provide. And I think we've done an excellent job over the years. So my question would be right now, because of this rate increase, and I don't know, Tina, Melissa, or Chris, who can answer this, but have we had many complaints about this? Have we had any complaints?
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Melissa Richards, the Director of Communications for the City of West Fargo.
It was paid to go out and reached about 27,000. We did get about 10 comments. Half of them were complaints about having to pay more, and half of them were people telling them that it's awesome service in West Fargo and worth the rate. So it was kind of a split feedback.
Thank you, Ms. Richards.
Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Just a little history again. When we went to the automated system, we had this discussion whether we should continue to pick up everything or not. In fact, the other discussion we had is whether we should have the 64-gallon can or 96. We ran into a lot of households, and the 96 is where our recycling is, and that's picked up every other week, and we decided to go with the larger because of that. We went with the smaller because we had concerns about people being able to put them in their garages, outside their houses, so we went to a smaller. And at that time, feedback we had gotten from residents is they loved the service, they didn't want a change in the service. One of the reasons we went, yes, we did save costs, we cut some trucks and we cut some staff by the automated trucks. But the other thing, we wanted to save money, but we were also having a number of injuries for guys that were having to hand throw that stuff in there. Yes, we still have some, and yes, we could visit that and say, well, yeah, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't know what, Chris, if you've ever factored what that really costs out of our $17.50. How much does that extra, like he says, truck running around cost an average resident? And that would have to be you know, whether the citizens of West Fargo say, hey, I don't want that service anymore. I don't want to pay whatever it costs to do that. But that was a discussion we had, whether we should continue that or discontinue it. And at the time, there was a heavy leaning towards let's continue to give the full service we're given.
You know, I haven't put an actual pencil to it to get a number, but I can tell you right now, we send out one follow truck per day, has 2 individuals in the truck, and they spend about 3 hours on a route. So whatever that would come out to be, you know, it's a third of an FTE probably on a full year. So you're probably looking with truck costs. I'm gonna spitball around $40,000. So, but I think the benefit from our residents who really enjoy that added thing, if they're doing some remodeling, they put a window out there, you don't have to wait for cleanup week. And I think it usually makes our cleanup week a little bit lighter knowing that we can do that. If your neighbors are putting grass in there, we don't want grass in there. City of Fargo will actually reject our loads. We have that type of compostable material in there. So if you help us out with that, we'll certainly be happy.
It's not my job to police those
no.
things, but the thing about it is that I know what's happening and I see the things that are there. And the same thing is that you get, you know, I mean, in my neighborhood, just when this came out, I took a picture. I've got one guy that puts out 3, I don't know where he got 3 of those buckets from, but he puts out 3 buckets every week. And I don't think he recycles. You know, so where is the cost of that's there? My understanding was if we recycle, we save on this part of it. And so if you give them one, you get one can each week, or every other week you recycle, I think that's something that should be considered. I don't know, and the other part of back to what Melissa said about only a few comments, the people I've talked to say it's not going to make any difference anyway. I'm coming here because I vote, okay, elected to you people, and I think that I have the right to speak out. And bottom line, whether you consider and listen or not, it doesn't matter, but I think it's something that should be considered. And whether we go to the volume-based and the people that use more pay a little more, and just once again off the beaten thing, but the other night at the meeting for specials, two gentlemen, elderly gentlemen, waited for me as I came out of that door and thanked me for speaking up about somebody should speak up what's going on. Are we getting taxed too much? And both those gentlemen said to me, the garbage thing, they said, we're on a fixed income. $450 isn't that much, but we're fixed. $450 is not going to make or break my life a month. $54 a year. I think it's something that should be considered, though. Should it go volume and go from there?
Chris, tell us again about our neighbors to the east of Moorhead. If you have extra garbage, now that's more volume-based,
sure.
Is that correct?
I believe both Fargo and Moorhead both have volume-based programs, and you pay per can by the size of the can. I know Fargo offers, variable, like 3 different size garbage bins that they can collect at.
What if they have items outside the can? Are they picked up in Fargo or Moorhead?
They are not picked up unless I believe you have a sticker you put on the bag saying that you paid for additional costs. I also know the city of Moorhead also charges additional $15 per pickup, even if the lid is up on the bin. So Minnesota's a little more stricter on volume base. They're trying to reduce the impacts in the landfills. That's a little different game in North Dakota, but I think it's a good steward of our environment for anything we can save, recycle, and reuse, and reduce that footprint we have is a better thing. But I think I attest over all these years that our citizens truly enjoy the ability to not have it limited by volume.
Mr. Brunker?
Thank you. Having said that, Chris, when we started the recycling, what is the increase from the people that didn't to the way we do it? I think it was huge, wasn't it?
Oh, it's a giant increase. What we recycle in a single month used to be what we recycled an entire year.
So we've come a long ways.
I mean, we're recycling just shy of 200 tons a month right now of material, which is very, very significant. The cost savings it doesn't really pencil out there, but it's just the proper thing to do, and it's a great impact on our environment.
Thank you. Mr. Thorsten.
Chris, just for reference, if we went to a 96-gallon tub, if someone wanted that, let's say they have a lot of garbage, can our trucks handle that?
Yes, they can handle any of the standard, any of the manufactured tubs. They all have the same picking style up.
Okay, so I suppose in theory, if we wanted to get out of that, and I'm not saying we should at this point, but if we wanted to, there could be a larger garbage can available for those families that need a bigger one. They'd have to pay an upcharge, at least they should, and use that instead of their 64.
Right now what we do, if someone requests a second can, we ask them to purchase the can, and then we still pick it up at no additional cost to us, because we figure that's just saving our labor costs and potential for injuries. So we don't charge extra for that, but we do ask them to buy the can.
Okay, so at some point, if we ever wanted to get to that, I guess I haven't queried the citizens, but I know there's always been a strong support of the system as we have it, but that is something we could consider.
Yes, we certainly can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's what I was here to consider, those types of things. If you're using more, should you pay more? And I think that's something that you guys should consider as well.
Well, the one thing that this commissioner is going to take away from this evening, Mr. Marquardt, is the fact that, and we continue to hear this at different meetings and the different things that we're addressing, is the continued conversation with the public. The term you used was transparency. The fact that we will continue to try and do a better job. I do know that this was in the paper several times, and apparently you missed one of them, which can happen. You were dealing with some health issues in your family. But the fact of the matter is that the city should always be cognizant that any time that the citizens feel that they've been caught off guard about a decision that this group of men make up here, we need to do a better job. And we will continue and pledge to do that to our citizens. So we thank you for your time this evening and the fact that you shared with us your concerns, and we will have additional conversations going on. Obviously, Mr. Thorsted's comments about larger garbage cans, the discussion has now been opened about volume-based and those type of things. So, you know, stay tuned. But thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Just one closing
Yes,
comment.
Mr. Thorsted.
The other thing is, I've talked with Chris and I talked with Tina on this when we were talking about rates, is we're going to get into an annual review routine on this stuff. Doesn't mean we're going to raise it every year, but we're going to look at it annually, so it's not all of a sudden we're trying to put out a fire over here because it's come up all of a sudden and now we have to do a significant increase. I think most people would be much more comfortable with a small increase periodically than getting hit with a big one. So.
Yeah. Thank you for those comments, Mr. Thorsted, and that's exactly right, and that's what prompted this discussion on a rate increase for garbage, is that after the election, there's new commissioners, and obviously Mr. Simmons and Mr. Thorsted has served our community proud for many years, but there were a lot of questions being asked why. And so with regard to some of the rates that we charge, there was questions asked about revenues versus expenses. And it came to light that one particular of our areas was garbage, and that we were running in the red. And so that was moved on very quickly. Staff was marvelous in providing us with the information, and once that information was readily made available, and again, there was a conscious effort made by the commission, which is a good, sound decision-making by the commission, that they would supplement some of these rates because they had moved forward with recycling and the automatic bin pickup and all that type of thing. I totally understand where these previous commissioners are coming from, but the reality of it is 2018. There's 3 new commissioners, and we looked at that and we met, you know, obviously in public forums, and we felt that it was necessary that we make an adjustment because it had not been done since 2012, and that's 7 years, and so they had given the great support to the citizens with regard to cost, but it was time to take a look at it, and yeah, I think it was the prudent and the correct thing to do. Again, we need to be better communicators, and we thank you for bringing that to our attention. The next order of business is City Administrator's Report. Mrs. Fisk.
Good evening, Commission President and Commissioners. I have a list of meetings that I'm going to inform you about or remind you about for those of you that already remember. And other than that, things at City Hall are going well. We're just kind of plugging along. Starting in January, we've been keeping Jim extremely busy, and he's still coming back. So we're happy with that. So first, I want to remind you this Thursday, our next community forum on special assessments will take place at the Flame of Faith United Methodist Church. And then starting this Friday at 2:30, the North Dakota League of Cities holds legislative conference calls each Friday, 2:30. And as staff, those of us that are interested usually meet. We put the phone in the Haggart room, we put it on a conference call phone, and we listen. They usually update us on what's going on, what to be aware of, and ask for input. So those calls will be taking place at City Hall, and if we get enough people, we'll move it down to the Riverside room, and if it's so packed, we'll move it down to the West Fargo room. So anyone that's interested, please feel free to attend. On the 14th, which is a Monday, the following Monday, there will be the State of the Cities at the Holiday Inn. It begins at 8 a.m. If some of you have not signed up and would like to attend, let Courtney know, and we will take it from there. The next item on the 14th is at 6:30 will be our third legislative forum at the Legacy Elementary School. And then our final one will be on the 17th, which is Thursday at 7 p.m. at Eventide. That's at the Cheyenne Crossings. Has to be a little later because that's the only time that works good for their facility. And last but not least, there will be a DOT meeting on the Cheyenne Street Road Diet on Tuesday the 22nd from 4 to 6 p.m. This is all part of the DOT process for the funding that we received from the governor's office. So we'll be having a little public meeting then to see what kind of input we get.
What date was that, Tina?
That is the 22nd. And if you want, I can type all these up and email them out to all of you too, so that if you don't have them on your calendar, you can get them on your calendar. So, and other than that, I won't keep you, but Happy New Year.
Okay. Is there any correspondence from anyone? Okay. Chief Yankee, could I ask you to step to the podium, please? Would you share with the community and with the commissioners about your new liaison officer who is full-time on the job now doing the cultural liaison things?
Yes, Commissioner President and Commissioners. This week, or last week, Ryan Feltman, one of our former patrol officers, officially started as the new cultural liaison officer. We have an office that we're sharing with the school district up at the library and in the entryway when you go in, and he will be officing out of there. And right now, he's working with all the school resource officers, along with Fargo Police Department's cultural liaison officer, to get out and meet the community and to start building those relationships. So this is something we're building from the ground up to establish all the relationships with the community and take it from there. So we're hoping to have that fully going by the time spring and summer comes, so we can have outdoor events and those things with the different members of our community. So we're very happy that we got up to staffing so that we could put him full-time, and he will be actively out there along with Fargo, because especially with the diversity within our community, it crosses into the entire metro. So he needs to be working hand in hand with the Fargo Police Department and all of their cultural liaison community services officers. So he will be doing that, and we're proud, and we'll move forward and have better relationships than we've ever had in our community.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Appreciate the update. Are there any non-agenda items for anyone to bring forward? Hearing none. Mr. Simmons, do I have a motion?
Sure.
Mr. Simmons moves to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Olson. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening and a good week.